Good morning, everybody. This is Nicole Medor. I'm the Early Childhood Specialist at the Maine Department of Education. I'm joining today with my colleague Marcy Whitcomb. She's our Early Childhood Monitor at the department as well. She and I, in partnership with the American Institute for Research, are really excited to host these four-part webinar series. Unfortunately, our second webinar in the series had to be canceled last week. We were successful at rescheduling that for August 6th, and I'll be sure to make sure everybody has the information for that when the time comes. All of these are being recorded and stored on the maine.gov/DOE website. Again, I'll send information on how to access that. But I don't want to waste anybody's time on this day, so I'm happy to introduce Janice Kaiser. She's with the American Institute for Research, and she's going to be our host for today. So good morning, Janice.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. So this morning we're going to be talking about assessing young learners. And I'll give you just a little bit of information about my background. I have been an early childhood advocate, educator, director, trainer for 30 years, a long time. And in my current role, I am really excited to be able to work alongside researchers who are looking at a lot of different early childhood issues. And as those researchers create reports and findings, I get to turn them around into trainings and really work with local education agencies, in particular teachers and school administrators, on the ground. You know, what does this research tell us? What do we do with it? Those kinds of things. How does it impact my classroom? The reality is that not many of us want to sit down and read a big report and decipher what it means. So that's my job to do that for folks. So today we're going to try to increase your awareness of different purposes for assessment measures. And then we want to get into what does it look like for distance learning environments, because we know that's a thing right now in early childhood. So we'll talk through some of that. I will probably say a few times as we go along that this is just one conversation in many that you will probably have or should have around assessing young learners, and in particular under this current pandemic situation. So the ideas that I present to you today are definitely not exhaustive, but I hope they pique your interest to go and see what else you can learn. So if you would please, I'd like to know a little more about you. If you could share in the chat box your name and answer either of these questions. What do you find challenging or difficult about assessing young children? And what do you enjoy about assessment? And there should be a question mark on the second one that's missing. So take a moment to do that. I think I can get my chat box back, maybe. Nope, I can see who's participating, but not the box. That's okay, we'll move on, thank you. So there are a number of reasons why we assess, and in particular, we need to pay attention to how assessments are designed and what types of assessments actually fit the different needs that we have for learning about children's skills and knowledge. So assessments should always be designed with some kind of very specific purpose in mind. Picking one up off the shelf or choosing one, writing one yourself that is widespread, far-reaching, but doesn't answer any questions that you have about that child's knowledge and learning isn't really going to be a good use of your time or the student's time. It needs to be psychometrically sound, meaning that it's reliable. Every single time that instrument is used, you can be guaranteed that it is going to produce the information that you want it to produce, and it needs to be valid, meaning that it's appropriate for the age of the student, and that it is a measure that truly gets to what you need. And then we want to make sure too that the instruments are linguistically and culturally appropriate, making sure that students understand the language that you're asking them to respond to, and making sure too that it is an assessment that is respectful of the way children learn, of their home life, of their languages, of their abilities to translate and understand what's being asked of them, and so on. And it absolutely needs to be age appropriate and developmentally appropriate at the same time. So the assessment itself should assess developmentally and educationally significant content. It has to be a benefit to children. The purpose being that you will use the information that you glean from these assessments for their benefit and growth. And it needs to meet professional, legal, and ethical standards. So everything that we do, and I see there's also a typo there, I will correct that in the next version. Everything that we need to do needs to follow ethical guidelines and being very respectful of children's rights and needs as you go through this. And you must really think about ways that you can involve parents whenever possible, however possible, and that's going to be extremely important in the distance learning model that we'll talk about. All right, we're going to talk a bit about purposes for assessments, and I'll probably go pretty quickly through this section because I want to get into some conversation with you here very shortly. So there are many different kinds and purposes for assessments, but these tend to be the four big ones. Developmental screenings. Screenings are typically done at the beginning of a school year, where it's a baseline to understand everybody's skills and knowledge in your classroom. The assessment, the screening assessment is standardized, that meaning it's the same for everyone. And information that you glean from the developmental screening may prompt you to request a diagnostic assessment of a student. So for example, if you discover that they are having difficulties with their speech, or they're not quite hearing the questions as you're asking them, you might want to ask for a diagnostic assessment to see what's going on and to get a diagnosis in order to move that student into special education if that's what's necessary, or other specialized help and assistance and guidance along the way. But that screener is that really important first piece that leads you next to diagnostic assessment if it's warranted. Typically, diagnostic assessments are not given to everybody in the classroom unless it happens to be a classroom of students only who have special needs, and you would potentially use it in that way. We'll get into some formative assessment strategies here in just a little bit, but essentially formative assessment is used every day, all day. It's about observing and documenting students' growth and progress throughout the school year, and in particular within their classroom. Formative assessment has a lot of different styles and types and ways to do this, but it must, the important part of this is that the findings must support teachers in designing curricula. It should inform your lesson planning, what you do with students, how you do that, those types of things. So we'll dig into that a bit more here too. And child outcome assessments is the fourth one, and this is also a summative assessment, maybe the other terminology that you've heard. Summative assessments can occur throughout the school year, but oftentimes they occur at middle and end of school year. And these assessments are intended to be more standardized. These are ways for you to understand how students have learned specific concepts or how they did on a specific theme or a type of unit of study that you may have presented to them. So summative tends to be more prescriptive versus formative, which is more open-ended and guided by students and teachers working together. So we'll break these down just a little bit. You can often see regular screenings at birth, followed by evaluations and diagnostic assessments if needed. Screeners usually go through about 2nd grade, maybe the beginning of 3rd grade. I don't often see them above that grade level, but they certainly could if they needed to. The results are then communicated clearly to parents, and they're used to make decisions about referrals and possible services, as I stated there. They tend to be cross-system collaborations and strategies for sharing information, meaning that it's not isolated to your classroom. You would then use the results of a developmental screening to connect with specialists in your school district or on your campus who can do the diagnostic testing that would come next. Or provide the support services that may be necessary for an individual student. And in this too, you're gathering information and resources, your professional development, all of these types of things are coming to you for the purpose of supporting those students and connecting with families and being able to talk about where their child is developmentally. Diagnostic assessments, again, are used very specifically to look at significant concerns about children's development. And there are lots of ways and lots of resources for doing this. And there are some very specific ways to do it, though, in terms of special attention that's needed for things like speech and language delays, anything that falls into the special education category. Those types of things will require special testing that's very specific to what you think is going on and what you want to get further information about. Sometimes, and usually, depending on the outcome of the diagnostic assessment, you would end up with eligibility decisions based in part on norm referenced assessments that are age appropriate again and ethically sound and technically sound too. And then the product at the end of these diagnostic assessments is going to be the accommodations and the plan, an IEP, an individual education plan for those students who in fact need it. Formative assessment then is used to plan and evaluate instruction, and it should be linked to your standards and your curriculum goals, but it also can be used just to assess how children are interacting and socializing with their peers. How are they using the classroom materials? Is the room set up for particular children? So formative assessment can take on a lot of different sort of flavors or varieties depending on what it is that you would like to know. Formative assessment should take place during children's regular activities, so it's not a pull-out kind of a test or a sit-down type of an evaluation. It occurs during the activities and the lessons that you've already planned, and it occurs during any center time. It could occur outside if you're, depending on what you're watching. But it should very much be embedded in what's going on within the classroom or with the students in a very natural way. And you can use formative assessment as often as you feel like you need to. I know teachers that use formative assessment all the time. They're constantly taking anecdotal notes and keeping track of children's progress along the way, and then using those notes to, of course, influence and shape their lesson plans. And then, as we said a moment ago, the child outcome assessments, or those summative assessments, are really used to determine effectiveness in a particular program, a unit of study, those types of things. Within this type of an assessment, you might be looking at just a sample of children in a group that can be compared to others. The results of these summative or child outcome assessments are usually used outside of the classroom, meaning that you would be comparing to other classrooms of the same grade level on your campus or within your school district, those types of things. You wouldn't do that with formative assessment. That kind of information and data that you collect formatively stays with you in your classroom, and you own that intellectual property and use it to your advantage and your students' advantage. But child outcome assessment information or summative assessment information is benchmarked. It's specific. It can be used to compare and contrast to see how folks are doing along the way in different programs. And oftentimes, there are a variety of different measures, both developed within a school district or a campus, as well as store-bought or off-the-shelf kinds of assessments that some of you may already be using. And then there are modes or ways of assessing children. And we'll talk about each of these. Try to make this go away here. 1 second. Okay, it doesn't want, I've got a screen up that I need to close, but it won't close. All right. Oh, my apologies. So direct assessment involves adults and possibly another familiar adult who comes into the classroom, like an aide or a specialized teacher. Maybe they teach ELA, math, science, whatever it might be. And direct assessments are very specific. They're done with the intent to sit down and really test children's knowledge, to really be very direct in how you ask questions and the type of questions that students, or answers rather, that students would provide to you. They always have a goal in mind. So direct assessment might be very specific to vocabulary or sight words. Do they know them or do they not? Do they know their alphabet or do they not? And how many of the alphabet, how many letters do they know? How can they recognize them? Can they say them in order? It's very specific. It's very targeted. In contrast, indirect assessment is hands-off. It's not sitting with children and testing them with a rubric or a test instrument where you're asking the student to provide information to you. It is instead observational based. It might be collecting anecdotal notes, collections of children's artwork and other artifacts. It's extremely hands-off and intended to be on the fly within your regular day, and not so stringent or rigid in the way that it's done. These are the typical domains that are measured in early childhood, and they're probably very, very familiar to you. And I'd like to call your attention to the very middle of the image, because we know that in early childhood and beyond, that all of these things circle around one another. They overlap one another. They're not in and of themselves very isolated topics or domains that we look at. We look at all of it when we're talking about whole child assessment or whole child learning, whole child teaching, those types of things. Now, do we assess for these skills and abilities on their own? Yes, often and typically, but it is very important to make sure that we continue to have an understanding that all of these things are going on. And if we're doing formative assessment, we'll be looking for parts of these types of things that are happening in the child's regular day and the activities that they're doing with their peers and with you, and so on. So it's just important too, I think, to help parents understand the way that we do assessment in early childhood and the types of things that we're looking for, but they might be very different and should be very different from maybe their older children who are in the upper grades. that are being tested, usually using a standardized test or some other measure that's very targeted to a domain or a specific subject area. Approaches to learning is one I typically get some questions about, and this is really understanding how individual children learn. Are they more sensitive to loud noises and a lot of congestion and conversation in a classroom? That might mean that they can't focus on learning if they're hearing all of this other chatter and stuff going on. So maybe that student needs a quieter one-on-one or small group conversation to get the meaning of what you're teaching. Do they like to sit at a table versus sitting at the or on a chair at a desk or a table versus sitting on the floor to learn a concept? You know, just paying attention to how children learn and how you adjust their environment to meet those learning needs. All right, let's take a moment to chat. Please, I would really like to invite you to unmute yourself and let's share a little bit about how do you assess young learners right now? What are the techniques that you are using? And please feel free to share if it's working. Do you get out of those assessments what you need and what you want? Don't be shy.
I'll start. This is Erica Neal. I primarily use formative assessment. We do a developmental screening, the dance at the beginning of the year, and that helps me with just planning activities based on the developmental level of individual children. And then I, as far as formative assessment goes, what I typically do is look at my plan for the day and kind of figure out if I'm doing like a alphabet bingo game at the literacy table, then I'm going to pay attention to letter ID and just jot down the letters that children are recognizing as I'm holding up the cards. And I typically pay attention to just a handful of children so it doesn't get real overwhelming. And then I share data, I align it to the learning standards and then share it out through Seesaw with families. So that's what I do.
Great. That's perfect. And I know when I was teaching and even as a school director for almost 20 years, I frequently would take the sticky notes and put them on my lesson plans as I realized what was working and what wasn't working. Should this activity have been on a smaller scale with fewer children, or could it be handled in a larger group with 7 or 8 children? And most of us use our lesson plans over again and then tweak them as we need to, things like that, or tweak similar activities that are maybe upcoming. So I would hang on to those notes and keep them with those individual lesson plans. It was really helpful to me. Anyone else?
If you're uncomfortable speaking up, feel free to throw comments in the chat box also, and I'll read them.
Yeah, please do. All right.
So in our pre-K program, we do our formative assessment at the beginning of the year, assessing all children to see if we need to do a more diagnostic assessing on them to help with, speech or OT or any other assessing that should be done with that child. And then we also do direct assessing, such as letters, numbers, those types of things that we're teaching, along with the, sorry, my child in the background talking, along with indirect assessing, which I try, and it's very hard because, and I saw a lot of people comment how hard it is to do the anecdotal and the running records during the day because things come up when you're trying. You have this big plan. I'm going to look at these 3 kids today, and then so I can have those raw observations, which I think are so important in pre-K as well. But also, as Erica Neal said, I also look at what I'm teaching or what the activities are for the day, and I'll sit down at one of those activities and I'll take those observations as well. And then we use teaching strategies, and I upload that. And then that helps us create our checkpoint assessment to send home to families and our parent-teacher conferences.
And do you find that the way that you're assessing right now, is it successful for you? Is it working? Do you get what you need out of it?
It's helpful. So the direct assessing, I feel I get what I need out of it. The indirect, and like I said, can be hard because of, you know, you have this plan. I'm going to look at these 3 kids for 5 minutes a piece today, but something comes up in the classroom. So that piece can be very difficult, but I try, and every year I try something different. I tweak it a little bit. I try to make a schedule. Like on Mondays, I'm looking at these 3 students. At Tuesdays, I'm focusing on these 3, just to, so I know what to expect for my day. So if I see Susie over in block area, oh, that's a really good observation, and today is her day. And I mean, I'll stray from it if I see something really great going on somewhere else as well.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to share before we move on?
There's a couple of comments in the chat room.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Terry has said that to add what's already been said, she also uses a team approach. Her classroom team discusses what they've seen in the classroom, etc., to adjust their plans in the room or whatever the children need. Roxanne added that at Hope Pre-K, they do the Dial 4 at the beginning of the year, and then they use Teaching Strategies Gold for framework for their formative assessments and do a direct kindergarten readiness assessment 3 times a year. And Erica added to what she said earlier, she does take tons of pictures, videos, and voice recordings as well. Fabulous.
Great, great. We're going to move over for just about 5.5 minutes or so. I want to share with you a formative assessment video that my team made last year. In particular, I'll give you a little bit of background. We were working with the Oklahoma State Department of Education and helping them to design an early learning inventory that would be used. Sometimes you hear this as a kindergarten entry assessment is another way, but we wanted to make sure that the assessment that we designed with them had a process in a very intentional way of talking with children, evaluating children, and so on, that it wasn't the strict, rigid paper and pencil or computer, tests that sometimes young children, young learners, and older learners actually are very stressed by. So let's take a minute to look at this video, and then we'll chat about it. Let's see. Actually, hold on one sec. I have to.
While you're loading that up, Sue has asked in the chat room, Roxanne, if you could throw in the chat room what the kindergarten readiness assessment is that you use. She's interested in knowing that. Thank you.
We modeled after the New Mexico, oh my gosh, I've just totally lost the name of it. The New Mexico Department of Education created a kindergarten entry assessment that we really liked, and our team had done a validation study of it. I don't know why that just has gone out of my head. It will come back and I will share it. So I can share with you all as notes if that would be useful, some of the screenshots and the background around that assessment and how we structured it to meet Oklahoma's needs. And so maybe you could take a look, and you'll have my contact information too at the end. So I'm happy to chat about it and share with you what we were doing and how we did it. All right, let me get.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome. Are you still able to see my screen? No. Okay, let's get this back. There you go. Now can you see the video that I'm about to start? That one's up. Okay, very good. And I'll make it full screen.
Janice, there doesn't seem to be any sound.
Okay, there's sound on my end.
It's that little box when you share your screen, you have to click to share audio with a video.
Okay, let me, yep. Got it. Thank you. Better? Oops.
I'm not hearing it. Is anybody else hearing it? No, we're still not hearing the audio.
I think you have to stop share, and then when you go to share again, you click the little, it's a tiny little button at the bottom.
Yeah, I did that. And then reshare. Yeah, they're both checked. Okay. My apologies. I'm not quite sure why it's not wanting to. We'll try again though. Hold on, let me. There. Better?
No, there's still no audio. Which is weird.
Well,
It did work.
then
I promise.
it did. It absolutely did. I'm so sorry. I don't quite know how to fix it any differently because it is checked. Very odd. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Okay. Well, it's a pretty brief video. I can certainly share it as a link and you'll be able to go and take a look at it on your own. We used it when we were working with New Mexico and also when we worked with Oklahoma, just to lay a foundation. Primarily, the teachers watched it, but a whole lot of school administrators were interested in watching and understanding because they have a very different impression or different idea about assessing children in pre-K and kindergarten. So this video helps to just sort out, why do we do this and what does it look like? So I will make sure that you get this link right after we're done here. Let me go back to our PowerPoint and get. All right, are you still seeing the screen then?
Not yet.
Well. Okay, is it fixed now?
Yep, it looks good.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's dig in a little bit deeper on formative assessment at a distance, because I think this is where a lot of your time might be spent in this next school year. And this can be really challenging, and we know that. It's different because we're used to assessing children formatively in their natural environments in our classrooms, and as they're moving around those rooms and interacting with one another, interacting with you, and interacting with the materials that you provide in that classroom. So this is going to look different. The first thing you need to do is to make sure you know your purpose. What are you trying to see? Why are you trying to see that? What will you gain from this particular piece of information or body of information that you're looking for? And then you need to be very clear with students as well as families about what you're looking for and why. They need to understand it now more importantly than ever before, because we don't usually inform parents in formative assessment when we're doing it in the classroom. They'll see the information at the end and maybe some kind of a parent report or a report card or messages or conversations that you have with them. but they're not generally a part of actually collecting the data. And now they will be if their students are at home, as we think they will be. You need to prepare to collect data over time. This is not going to be a one and done. It's very methodical in terms of being organized, knowing what you want to assess, but it's also very flexible. And so we want to make sure that you're looking at not just one point in time and assuming children's knowledge and skill levels, but you're looking at a lot of different pieces of evidence that give you a good foundation of what they know or what they don't know. And then to do this, though, you're going to have to probably provide activities and ideas for parents that they can do at home that are supportive of what you want them to learn and what you'll be looking for when you interact with their students and when you share with them too. So it's a two-way process. You know, you're working together and you're very collaborative with the family. And then you really, in order to pull this off, you have to be very present. And there are lots of conversations that we've been having around how in the world do you interact with pre-K or kindergarten students in Zoom or in other online platforms. And there are a number of ways to do that. You can hold small group meetings where you break them up and you're meeting with the small group a few times a week or even every day if your schedule allows. You can meet regularly with an individual student and their families using Zoom or the telephone if that's what you have to do, if there's a technology barrier in place. You can hold virtual story times and sing-alongs. You can also meet one-on-one with students and well, I guess that's listed twice. I'll make that correction as well. A lot of teachers that I've worked with are videotaping lessons that they share through email and classroom platforms that they're using that parents can check into. They're sharing videos of story times, sing-alongs, things like that. And of course, I'm pretty sure that you all are doing this as well, sharing activities that they can do at home. How do we assess how students are doing? What's the actual way that we gather information? It's going to be through those whole and small group activities, and it's going to be the one-on-one check-ins with them on knowledge and learning. And then asking very pointed, meaningful, open-ended questions and documenting responses, both from children and from parents. I'm curious to know from some of you, though, what were you doing at the end of the school year from March to May or June, depending on when you guys got out of school? What kinds of assessments were you using at that point? Anyone want to share?
I think the biggest piece for me anyways was just like general check-ins, like making sure everybody had what they needed in terms of like basic needs and that everyone was okay. I don't think there was really an academic focus for assessment this spring because it was just too fast.
Right. Were you using any of the information that you got from the check-ins to put together packets or to provide ideas and supports to families, or was it just a general how are you doing kind of check-in?
I think on an individual need, if parents were looking for resources in terms of online books, book access, or places for good activities to use at home, then that information was provided. It was really more around, do you have access to food and the technology you need and the special services.
Yeah. And we've heard that a lot too. Did you find that there were a number of students who did not have access to technology? Was that a barrier for you?
I think it was initially, and the families had access. Pre-K students didn't necessarily have access, but families had access.
Right.
If that makes sense.
It does make sense. And we also have had to address limitations here where students were having to use their parents' computers, for example, but the parents are trying to work at home at the same time. So you run into some scheduling issues, and perhaps those planned classroom meetings that you want to do with Zoom or other platforms can't necessarily include everybody under those circumstances. So I know several school districts where they asked the teachers to flex their time, and that some of those get-togethers had to happen either very early in the morning prior to parents going to work or right afterwards. So it really made the structure of the teaching day very different from anything we've done before. Anyone else like to share how you were doing this?
I'll just chime in related to the technology issue.
Yeah.
Our district did the best they could to provide both devices and wireless access to families, but we don't have enough resources to have one-to-one for every student. So by default, pre-K, because it's not compulsory, was not afforded the tech devices that other students were. And you know, I think the issue is every family is different. So depending on what the resources are in the home, including the adult resources, and how many children are in the home, you know, having one laptop if there are 5 students there is very problematic. So it's something that we've definitely worked really hard on this summer to try and remedy. And, you know, really grateful that DOE is looking into potentially providing some technology for pre-K students.
Yeah, I hear you. I talked with a district here. I'm in Austin, Texas, and I talked with a school district here that's very rural, and many of their students did not have Wi-Fi access. So they chose to equip their school buses with Wi-Fi access and modems, routers, things that they would need. And those buses would go into the communities, into the neighborhoods, and the school district provided laptops and tablets so that it was a per family situation. They tried not to give, it wasn't necessarily one-to-one because they also were limited on the number of computers and tablets that they could hand out, but they tried to look at the family structure. And if they had 2 children in the family that were in school, they could share 1 unit. Perhaps if there were 3 or 4 students in the house, they would get 2. So they tried to work it out evenly that way. And then the teachers were working together to schedule their times and when they would do those meetings. But the buses were going out every day in the middle, at the beginning of the morning, and staying out for the whole day, and just parking in areas that had high need. They also utilized the bus in another way. It was to be a hub for parents and children to come and pick up sack meals, lunch bags and breakfasts in a bag, those types of things, as well as packets of information that teachers would give to the bus driver or the monitor who was traveling on the bus too, so that when they were in those neighborhoods, made it as easy as possible for parents to get what they needed. They were emailing these things out, but that too can be a barrier for some parents if they don't know how to use the technology, or they don't want to, or don't have time to. Print packets with ideas and activities really helped. Anyone else?
There is in the chat box from Carrie. She says, besides general check-ins with students and parents, she also designed tasks that students could complete on Seesaw. As the child completed the activity, she had the child record their voices so she could hear them identify letters, numbers, etc. as they marked each item. Parents also video recorded their children completing hands-on activities and then sharing with her through email.
That's fantastic. What grade level is that? Is that pre-K or kindergarten?
Pre-K.
Pre-K. Very good.
Vicki has added that she had families send her photos and videos of children's work, but it was difficult to truly know how much adult support may have been given. Usually they gather so much valuable assessment information from the process of the work, which is very true.
Yep. That's exactly right. And, you know, we see this in all grade levels, in particular on, you know, take home activities and things like that. It is difficult to know whether it was student led and student produced, or whether there was extra help from an older sibling or a parent. I hear that.
Something that I did that I found was really helpful was I put together I had all families already on Seesaw, so I sent out a link to a survey, like a 3-question survey. So then they were as involved with all of the technology as they wanted to be or could be. So I offered Zoom, individual Zoom. I met with some through like Google Duo. I offered individual phone calls like on a weekly basis. And so they could just let me know what they preferred as far as check-in. And then I kind of tailored the assessment based on how involved they were with me. And also I asked, another question on the survey was about the child's current interests. And so then that way I planned my daily story. I uploaded a video of me reading a story every day onto Seesaw, and then those stories were reflective of the interests of the children at the time, which just, I think, helped to communicate to families like, hey, look, I'm really trying here to like meet you where you're at. And, and so, yeah, that was helpful. That's
very helpful. I don't know if this happened to anyone else, but I did know of one situation where a child was really not willing to participate or watch the videos the teacher was planning or sending out, didn't want to join in the Zoom meetings, didn't want the parent to talk with the teacher on the phone, and so on, became very sheltered and distant to the entire distance learning process and the things that were being offered to him. And that was unusual because he didn't behave that way in the classroom. He was very engaged and socially doing great, emotionally seemed fine. Finally, the parent was able to get him to explain why and got the teacher on a phone call to talk about it. Turns out he thought he was the only one not allowed to go to school. He didn't understand that everybody was at home. He thought the teacher didn't want him in the classroom. And it was a real, well, it was very upsetting to everyone, frankly, but it was very eye-opening too. It gave the teacher a glimpse into and a reminder of how very young they are, and their perceptions of time, their perceptions of our intentions or what's going on around them are different than ours. Of course they are. So it was an interesting thing to learn, but also a cautionary tale that sometimes we might need to be specific with some students if we think that they're going to have a hard time understanding why they're at home, or and even asking if you see a drop in participation or performance, maybe there's something there.
There are a few more in the chat box.
Okay, yeah, let's hear those.
Let's see, Mary had written that once they had food and technology in place, she offered one-to-one sessions with kindergarten children. She tried to review letter sounds, sight words, basic math skills, and had them choose a book from 3 that she offered, which she would then read to them. And then she found a excuse me, book creator app, and they worked on writing a book together on a topic of the children's choice by sharing her screen. This year, she says she hopes to have children be able to work on a book between sessions. So she only had about a quarter of the families that took her up on the one-to-one sessions, which became more of a model, a coaching model. But she had a lot of fun and enjoyed learning together with the children. And then Erin added that she provided weekly learning schedules that included read aloud, song, poems, and center activities that connected to the read aloud. The activities she uploaded on Google Classroom. And then this one I found really interesting and really good idea, that Jen Sumner said in her district, they created a History in the Hills, very engaging calendars for families to choose activities from. She completed several Zoom meetings to support the whole group, small group activities and one-on-one instruction. She did a daily read aloud with songs and poems that kept them engaged, and sent home packets and communicated daily on Classroom Dojo. Activities were suggested, and they added pictures and videos to their portfolios on Dojo, and asked parents what they wanted for their kids and interests of their kids to help make learning more fun. A lot of outdoor activities.
Yep, that's fantastic. That's a great list, very useful and very good to hear. Congratulations. That's a lot of good learning and a lot of good data collection.
We also did an archive. So the district with the History in the Hills, each student got to choose a few things that they put in an archive. So later on when they graduate, they'll be able to have things they can go back and see what they did during this remote learning time.
That's fabulous.
Yep.
I thought I heard another comment starting up. Nope. Okay. All right. We've already talked about this just through your examples, things that you can collect as artifacts, photos, videos, writing samples, drawings based on themes or topics of interest for children, and so on. And key to all of this is making sure that learning is meaningful and engaging. And keeping in mind, a lot of us have young children at home or students at home that are also needing our own assistance. So I would add to this list of how to do distance learning environments that you have to have your own schedule working and accommodating to get all of these other things done. And I'm sure you already know that, but I'll put it out there as one of the challenges I know that we've all been facing and trying to figure out through this. So there are 7 ways to think about making distance learning work for you. And it sounds like many of you are doing some of these things or all of these things. But the very first one is let children lead the way. Following children's interests, encouraging them to continue to play, to explore, and to learn, but doing so in their home, their backyard, or their neighborhood. It's a little bit different than encouraging free play in our classrooms, but it can still happen. And then asking families to please submit any videos or photos of children at play, so that it's not simply that they're submitting video or photo of an activity that was prescribed or you asked them to do or suggested them to do, but in their free play, especially if there are more than one student in the home that are of similar age. Maybe there could be cousins over or something like that, so that you can see the interaction and you can still see how they're playing. Also, through play, we know that we can learn a lot about what children are thinking and how they're feeling, because they will often interject their own impressions of teachers, of parents, of what they hear, things like that. And we glean a lot of information about what children are going through emotionally when we just sit back and watch them free play. So encourage those parents to just stand back out of the way, don't interfere or interject anything, and just videotape. You might also ask or share rather ideas for alternates to screen time. This was an interesting thing that kept coming around that we've all heard forever, for a long time now, to limit screen time. That in some school districts it's limited to 15 or 20 minutes a day per child in classrooms. There are state guidelines in a lot of states that say you can only have a certain amount of screen time. And parents know this too. So when we went to distance learning, a lot of parents were very confused about that now. I think those guidelines have relaxed a bit. Doesn't mean that we don't need to be concerned. We certainly don't want them on screens all day long. But it's a good topic to share with parents and talk about, and then helping them to understand what's acceptable screen time and what is maybe optional or not necessarily so great for children to be involved with. So those open up some good conversations and a good way to know what's happening in the home too. We should view families as our partners, and it sounds like many of you, and if not all of you, are probably already doing this, but maintaining that momentum is a challenge sometimes. I know for the school districts that I was working with in one state, the directive from the superintendents of those districts said that we were not going to introduce a lot of new material at the end of this last school year, but instead they wanted teachers to focus on improving and shoring up and strengthening the skills that they had already been working on prior to the shutdown, to make sure that those were solid. The rationale being that when we start school again, that teachers would be doing some kind of an assessment, an inventory, a screener to understand what they know, and they would begin the new school year on grade level with what they were planning to do, but then they would also have this other piece of information about from the screeners where they could shore up and help and provide additional supports for students that weren't quite ready for the new material. So that's how they were handling it. Others did introduce new material, and they enlisted parents as partners, and they worked through, how do you teach this? Parents didn't, most of them, a lot of them didn't choose to be teachers. We did. So they're not always sure how to do it, but building those strong relationships with them and helping them through, helping them to understand helps. Using music and movement. It sounds like there are quite a few using music and movement, but not just sending videos of dance videos or yoga videos or sing-alongs, but also engaging children during our whole group activities to get up and move, to sing and dance together, things that you would do in the classroom, and even encouraging parents to do it with them. Finding people who are tech savvy and ask them to help. This was a big challenge for a lot of teachers because they had never dreamed of teaching pre-K or kindergarten online. And technology is challenging, as you saw me struggle with it here today. Zoom is not a platform I use very often. I use GoToMeeting, and I know that one very well. And this is true of you all. Maybe the platforms that you've been using are different or new to you. So enlist whoever you need to get you help. Same with families. Make recommendations. Perhaps your school district would be willing to have folks from your IT department talk to families on the phone and help them to understand how to use their computers in the ways that you need them to. And be patient and kind to yourself and others. There's so much stress right now, you guys. I know you feel it. I know you're experiencing this just like everyone else, but please take time for you and use your time to be thoughtful and planful about how you take your next steps. So what is next? We're coming up on the new school year. Have any of you, do you know what you're doing? I've heard that districts are not making decisions until August. There's all kinds of different scenarios going on. So take time to think about what your priorities are for the beginning of the school year. What do you need to know? Do you need to assess for that? And if you do, what will that assessment look like? There's a difference between what you need to assess for and what you want to assess for. So sort those out and spend some time really thinking about what it's going to look like and what you're going to have to do to get that data and that information out of families and children. And then set reasonable expectations for yourself and your students. It's not going to be a quick fix, generally speaking. The beginning of the school year will be new and different. We won't be having these in-person open houses, but you can certainly do that as a virtual experiment or activity. Some schools perhaps might do open houses in small groups, so that's going to require doing that multiple times. So be reasonable with what you can get done and how you can do it, and keep your mind open that you may have parents who won't even come to a small group open house. So you end up doing one virtual session and maybe one in person, just being flexible as we all have had to do and will continue to do. And then again, partnering with families to assess student learning and achievement just can't be said enough. Parents need to be empowered, they need to be encouraged, and they need to be supported so that they can do all of those things for their student. And also look beyond just the parents. There may be older siblings that are better equipped because they have time that the parents may not have, that they can help to engage their sibling in playtime, in help, these assessments that you want to do, and so on. They're great videographers, they're great photographers. So encourage families to sort of think outside of the box about who needs to be doing this. And sometimes it's a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. So we're at the end of our time, I see, but I will stick around if there's questions or you want to chat about what's going on in your particular situation. I want to share with you my contact information. I will make those few corrections to the video, or the PowerPoint rather, send that to Nicole and Marcy so it can go out. I will also share the link to our short video. Take a look. I'd love to get your feedback on that. That video I will share with you is being used in a variety of different ways. It's very introductory to formative assessment. It's on purpose, but we are writing some useful guides on how school districts can use it to inform new teachers or teacher aides, new administrators, or maybe not new administrators who just aren't familiar. So I'm happy to share those as they're developed and they're made public. And you're going to want this QR code, so please be sure to grab that, and I'll leave it on the screen for just a little bit. I want to thank you very much for being here. I look forward to talking with you some more in the next couple of weeks. So you